messages and so many emails and so many people who have commented to me trying to figure out or at least give me some idea of what they feel that the timeline is for this average inflation rate, since the Federal Reserve does not give us any kind of inclination of what this average inflation rate over time is with with the mathematical formula for us to then know what that means. And now I've said it before and I've said it again, and I'm going to keep doing it until people finally really grasp it for themselves, because really I think the problem is that we want to think of things logically, like always, right? Anytime we ever have any kind of problem or anything to solve, like, especially men, we just think logically in everything. So when we're presented with something that says, hey, here, I'm going to give you this idea of an average inflation rate of 2% over time, but I'm not going to give you a mathematical formula to figure that out, you immediately start going into what it is that mathematical formula would be in order to figure out an average inflation rate over time. This is how everybody would work, like everybody. You have to throw that out the window. You have to just kind of forget about like thinking about it logically or trying to come up with a mathematical formula or come up with an actual definition of what average inflation rate over time is, because there is none, right? And this is one of the harder things that it took for me to try and even understand. It's just like, how could you possibly like even come up with a concept, a policy, a strategy, if you do not come up with at least some sort of idea of what average inflation rate over time is. Like, you got to have a mathematical formula for it. Now, this is what Powell had to say. Let me say here. In a speech that was given in August of 2020. And so, for those of you who have been on my channel for any length of time, you have heard me talk about this a lot, right? This is a speech that I have brought up quite a few times just recently. How many people we got here? 18 people with 9 likes. I love it. All right. Okay, so to prevent this outcome and in the adverse dynamics that could ensue, our new statement indicates that we will seek to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time. Therefore, the following periods when inflation has been running below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will aim to achieve inflation that moderately above that inflation moderately gee whiz, to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. In seeking to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time, remember, this is exactly what Powell was saying. We wanted to see 2% over time. We are not tying ourselves to a particular mathematical formula that defines the average. Boom, right there. So anybody who is trying to come up with a logical reason or idea or mathematical formula or timeline or something for what the average inflation rate is over time, there is none. He says it right there. We are not, in seeking to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time, we are not tying ourselves to a particular mathematical formula that defines the average. Thus, our approach could be viewed as a flexible form of average inflation targeting. Right? So now you're really lost, right? Trying to figure out what that even means. Our decisions about appropriate monetary policy will continue to reflect a broad array of considerations and will not be dictated by any formula. Of course, if excessive inflationary pressures were to build or inflation expectations were to ratchet above levels consistent with our goal, we would not hesitate to act. This is probably one of the most incredible speeches that was given that nobody heard. This came from Jerome Powell. Everybody wants to hear what Jerome Powell has to say on the news, but nobody wants to hear what he has to say inside of a speech that was given August of 2020 that dictates what the inflation rate is going to be over time that has no mathematical formula to it. See, nobody sees that. Everybody thinks about this 2% target. This is why everybody got it wrong. This is why everybody got the Fed rate cut call wrong. Now everybody's confused. You look out there and everybody's just like, whoa, hawk. Like, you see, like, I saw like Powell holding this like hawk, like he was some kind of doing like falconry or something. I saw this meme. It was just like, it's funny as hell. Like, some of the things that are coming out now, because just a few weeks ago, everybody was sure that the Federal Reserve was going to be cutting rates. Now, Do they really not have any way of figuring out what this mathematical formula over time really is? That is not true, right? There is a way that they have figured out what they are going to use to come up with this average inflation rate over time, this 2% average inflation rate. Now, this is probably the hardest part, the hardest thing to understand. I did a video on this called the Fed's inflection point, right? And now, trying to just wipe your head clean of there being a mathematical formula is probably the harder part of what this is, because this is actually pretty easy to understand. Okay. So, like, let's think about this for just a second. The Federal Reserve is looking for a 2% average inflation rate over time, but they failed to achieve 2% inflation. So quantitative easing, 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce the inflation scenario that the Federal Reserve was looking for. They ran consistently under 2% inflation. Now, I know that there's going to be a lot of people who go like, oh, dude, you're completely wrong about inflation. The inflation numbers are way different. I know. I get it too, right? We don't care. We're not looking at our numbers and what we think that they should be. We're looking at the Fed's number and what they think, because they're the ones in charge of monetary policy. So they failed to achieve their 2% inflation target over time, and now they're going to try and make up for it. So given that it was 2020 in August and the pandemic was just setting in and there hadn't been the inflation scenario yet, it makes it very difficult for one to try and understand where is it that they think that the Fed, or where they think that the inflation was going to come from, considering that a quadrupling of the money supply didn't do it. But yet all of a sudden they're just going to come up with inflation. And now this was one of the arguments that I was putting out there on my channel. I didn't understand. How is it that the Federal Reserve is going to achieve an above inflation target for a longer period of time, considering that they didn't achieve inflation for the last 10 years, right? Pandemic kicks in, shortages, all of a sudden now we have inflation. So now what is it the Federal Reserve is going to do with this added inflation that is running extra hot, right? Now, think about it like this. I'm going to read this right here, and then we're going to go back and we're going to understand this a little bit better. Okay. The FOMC did not define the window of time over which it would be looking back to assess progress towards its goal. By looking back far enough, it is possible to identify a starting date where average inflation through the present day has come in exactly at target. For example, and they show a figure here, that when a graph here, let me say that when considering inflation from October of 2008 through August of 2023, headline PCE inflation averaged 2% per year on average, right on target. That right there, right? That part. If you take today's current inflation and you look back far enough in time, there is a moment that you took all the inflation that we have experienced and the shortfalls that had occurred before. You're going to find there is a moment in time in which that all this inflation averages out to 2%. There is a day, like there is a date in a minute, right? They know exactly it was 2% on this exact day, considering the inflation that we are experiencing today. If inflation ramps up or drops down, from that point on, that date will move on according to the inflation that we are experiencing today and averaging that in and incorporating that into the past time. So now this right here, once you understand it, right, that if you incorporate from the inflation that we are experiencing today, look back in time, you can find that there is a 2% average inflation rate over time that we had experienced. And in the day of this writing, it happened to be October of 2008. Right. And this was written, or at least through August of 2023. So it wasn't even that long ago. Right. So if you can kind of consider that right there, that this timeline of about 15 years, there was an average inflation rate. Now, they're not going 15 years. Like 15 years is inconsequential. It just happens to be 15 years. It could have been 10 or 5 or 20 or whatever. It just happened to be 15 years. Now, if inflation runs extra hot and runs up, that timeline is going to start moving closer to us. You understand? Then it would only be maybe 10 years. You see, now this is what the Federal Reserve is looking at. They state it right here. So now understanding this is their average inflation rate over time and how far away that 2% average inflation rate is from the current inflation that we are experiencing today. So now, when we look at this 2% average inflation rate over time and we experience inflation today that is now pulling this date closer to us, if we consider that, like, let's assume for just a second that we didn't have the inflation that we have experienced. Like, it's 2019, right? The end of 2019, Donald Trump's still screaming there's no inflation, right? The Fed should be printing money. I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that. All right. There's no inflation taking place at the end of 2019. If you were to take that moment in time in the inflation that we had experienced and you look back in time to find a 2% average, it would probably be much longer than 15 years, right? Because we had not experienced inflation for quite some time and the Fed was failing to achieve inflation, you'd probably have to look back, I don't even know. I don't have a chart, so I'm not going to try and assume, but it would be much farther than 15 years than the current date is today. Now, as the inflation starts to ramp up, you can start seeing back there, okay, if we take today's inflation that we have experienced plus the shortfalls, there is a date farther out there. And if you had more inflation, that date would start moving up, right? Because it would start taking out those shortfalls from inflation from the 2% target that they failed to achieve by having extra hot inflation. Now, eventually it's going to meet an inflection point where you cannot find a moment in time any closer to today that you would get a 2% average. The average would start moving up, right? That they couldn't find. The inflation is running too hot. There is no more shortfalls to incorporate into the average. Now you have to start moving back out onto the timeline. This is the inflection point that the Federal Reserve is most likely looking for. Because at that moment, if they have inflation running at 2%, if the economy has inflation currently at 2%, at the exact moment of this inflection point, they can start targeting inflation again, right? At 2%, and hoping that they can maintain this 2% and have a forward-looking average inflation rate as opposed to backward-looking like they are doing today. This is so complicated, I understand, but it's really not that hard. Like, once you understand it and you understand that there is an inflection point where that 2% average inflation rate, considering the inflation that we have experienced today, can no longer move any closer to us on a timeline, that's the inflection point in which that they would have to move back out onto the timeline in order to have the 2% average inflation. If you run inflation lower than the 2% target during this time, you can start pulling that inflation target closer to you, right? Because now you're incorporating the shortfalls in with the extra hot inflation that is up there, like that we've had just recently experienced. So the extra hot inflation that we have experienced will then now have to incorporate shortfalls from inflation to make sure that we maintain the average over time. I know it's hard, guys. I know this stuff is hard, and it's not like it's not so complicated you can't get it. Because I mean, believe me, man. I mean, I barely graduated high school. I stutter when I read. I have a hard time with comprehension. I do all that other like stuff that would cause like people to like not even want to do this. But it's important, right? It's important to study this stuff. It's important to internalize it, and it's important to understand it for yourself. So you're not like a lot of these people. Like, it just blows me away when I read some of these articles out here, and I find people who are just completely like just lost on what it is that's going on. Like, they're like, oh man, now I don't even know if the Federal Reserve should even cut at all, when you had nothing but Fed cut rates all the time coming out of the mainstream media. People were participating in the economy as if it had already happened. The credible threats that are coming out are just unreal. And I'm trying to call it out for you guys. I'm trying to call out these credible threats ahead of time so that you all see them just as clearly as I do, at least in the fashion that I do. I mean, I can't see all of them until they are actually exposed, but man, it's like, it seems everybody out there is just like, is missing it, They just seem to be missing it. All right. Thank you for being here. We're 15 minutes into this. I'm not going to do a terribly long live stream. Freddie's doing basketball, so I'm just thought I would hang out with you guys today because really I'm on vacation and I got nothing else to do. No, I got plenty to do. I just love saying that because I didn't realize I was supposed to be on vacation this week. I thought I had taken the 15th through the 20th off, and I actually had taken the 12th through the 20th off. And so I had extra days that I was not expecting. So it's simple double speak to as maintain, ambiguated. Good Lord. Some of the words I just can't say. That's it. No, I don't think that's it. I don't think that they are just simply just trying to make it confusing on purpose. I think it is confusing because of the way that they state it, and they don't, it's, it, I mean, it's pure gaslighting, right? When they allow people to believe and then they don't fix the the belief. Like they don't correct that belief and they just say, "Yeah, if you want to believe it that way, that's fine by us. I mean, that's not what we said, but go ahead." Right? If you want to gaslight yourself. And that's exactly what it happens, right? I mean, it's just like when think about it in the 60 minutes interview that we were talking about, right? And Jerome Powell was asked, when you get to the 2% target, you are going to cut rates, right? And Jerome laughs, oh, no, 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 no. That's not what we said at all, right? We're going for a 2% average inflation. We're going for a 2% over time. That's what we said, right? And then there's no clear definition of that. We already know this. Like to clarify that they are not going for a 2% target, straight up said it, that we are not adjusting interest rates when we achieve the 2% target is completely contradictory to the way that the Federal Reserve had typically operated their system. They always, when they had achieved 2%, would adjust the monetary policy if it went over or under. Right? If it went over 2%, they would try and stimulate the economy or restrict the economy to try and bring the inflation back down to 2. If they were running under, they would stimulate the economy to achieve the 2% and then let bygones be bygones. That's literally what they said. But now they are not letting bygones be bygones. And that is a huge, huge difference that nobody seems to understand or take into consideration, especially when you listen to the mainstream media, the corporate media out there, and these economists who seem to have missed these statements, this speech and this article coming from the Federal Reserve itself, talking about what this average inflation rate over time is. The 60 Minutes interview really confused a lot of people. They said that they had I mean, I don't mean to call anybody out, but people were saying that the Fed said that they admitted a mistake, that they thought that the inflation was going to come down quicker from the supply side, that they were going to get more help from the supply side. That right there is the biggest damn lie that I have ever seen. It's an act that I mean, like those of us who, again, who have been following on my channel for 2.5, 3 years, remember me saying that this is not going to work. The Fed must be lying about this. They know. If I could call it out, if the uneducated economist can sit there and say, getting help from the supply side is not going to help. Inflation is going to run persistently long because of that belief. I could not possibly have been the only one. Like the Federal Reserve must have known that too, right? Like the uneducated economist got it 100% wrong and the Federal Reserve got it 100% right, right? No, that's not the way. I mean, this is the thing. Like the credible threats that they use are a lot of times just the people's own perception, like their own beliefs, and the Fed doesn't correct it. And that's really what it comes down to. By saying they wanted help from the supply side of things, and then I come out and say, no, no way. No way do you believe that's going to work. Right? But yet that was the continued narrative all the way up until like, we thought we were going to get help from the supply side, right? No, they didn't. They never once ever thought that they were going to, right? And that's what got me. It was just like, what is this? A damn, like, I mean, does everybody else seem to believe this? Right? But they did. They believed the Fed then, and then they believed that the Fed made a mistake when they were like, we thought we were going to get help from the supply side. Really weird. I wonder why that didn't show up. I mean, maybe he didn't watch The Uneducated Economist because he knew? That doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, I couldn't have possibly been the one who knew. Yeah. And that's what gets me about it. It was just like, if I can call it out, then I know the Federal Reserve should have. And otherwise, it was a lie. It was a pretend. It was an act. It was a show. It was a credible threat. And that's exactly what I believe. That way, they could keep the inflation running extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time, and then have something to blame it on. We thought it was going to get help from the supply side. We didn't. That's what caused inflation to run persistently long. Our mistake. No, it doesn't work like that. It never has. Good evening from Lakeland, Florida. Hey, Kevin, right on, man. It's great to see you here. I feel like the people underestimate how many average people don't believe in the important psychological and the game theory. Right, the psychology and game theory. Right, absolutely. You know, I don't even understand that very much. I just understand that the things that I'm like, I could sit in a Fed meeting. I know I could. I could sit in a Fed meeting and go like, what are you guys planning on doing? right? You're going to put out that idea or something like that and then hope that everybody's going to stick to it. Oh, you're going to use the corporate media to do it. All right, of course you are, right? I mean, you're going to state it directly within your speeches, right? I mean, because you're going to tell us, but then the corporate media is going to push something else that is such a different belief, and everybody's going to believe that because nobody really reads this stuff and nobody actually thinks that the uneducated economist could ever possibly have called it out, right? Hello, UE. All right, hello. Credible threats is an epic statement. What do I got here? Well done. Yeah, you're welcome. Well, once you see it, like you can't unsee it. That's it. Like it's like there's no going back to figure like, well, I'm gonna go back to my old way of believing. You can't. Like there's literally no way of doing it because now when you see things and you hear people out there, you're like, that isn't right. Like, these people who are calling out what the Federal Reserve is planning on doing, they're like, you guys aren't talking about the average inflation rate over time that they have no metric for, that they're, like, it's easy. Like you can say it better than they can. And you're like, you do like all the entire argument, everything that you're going for an investment, everything that you're suggesting as far as an opinion is based on this 2% in target that they are not shooting for. But yet everybody is moving their money towards that kind of, direction. Crazy. Just absolutely nuts. But yet this is what most people experience. And in fact, unless they happen to watch this video, they wouldn't even have any idea that there is an average inflation rate over time concept. They still believe that there's a 2% target that they're trying to achieve over time, whatever the hell that means. Like, I don't even understand what their idea of what the Federal Reserve is going for, because this makes so much more sense to their actions. Why it is that they kept interest rates extremely low for an extended period of time. How many times did you hear me say they're going to let inflation run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time to make up for the past shortfalls of inflation? It was all within their own statements. People thought that they had lost control. No, that was their fixing for deflation. It was all the tools that they needed in order to solve the deflationary nightmare that they knew was coming to the economy. And everything that they had described within Ben Bernanke's speech, all the tools, pretty much all of them, are now deployed right now within the economy, or have been just recently within the economy. And those tools were all described as tools to fight deflation. It's so nuts to think, and everybody here is thinking that the Federal Reserve is fighting inflation. They're not. It's quite the opposite. All right, 103 people watching with 47 likes. Let's go hit that like button right now. Get it up to 100 likes in the next couple of minutes. All right, where economic well, geez, where the economy runs on energy, then hydrogen is topical. When do you start calculating inflation? See, this is it. When they started printing money, or whenever the Fed told us to. No, see, you're wrong. You're looking at it. Who is this? Persistence over resistance. See right there. See the misunderstanding within this right here. When do you start calculating inflation? Wipe that question completely out. Don't think that way, because that's not what the Federal Reserve is looking at. They don't start the calculation of inflation. They're starting from today. They're looking from today. Yesterday wasn't a 2% average, right? Last week, right? There wasn't a 2% average. 2 weeks ago, there wasn't a 2% average. 2 years ago, there wasn't a 2% average. If they go back further, start incorporating in past shortfalls of from the 2% target, they will eventually go back in time and find 2% average inflation rate over time. From today's date to this particular date, somewhere in the past, they have a 2% average inflation. And tomorrow, that date's going to be different because they're going to incorporate whatever inflation that we had experienced the following day. Of course, that's not going to be very much. And, I'm being kind of facetious in that. But you guys get what I'm saying here, right? Every day, that date moves on how much inflation we are experiencing today, incorporating the past shortfalls. There is no starting date. They don't use that. Wipe that out. There is no starting date. Right? And so that's it. It starts today. Today's inflation incorporating going back in time, right? Backward looking average inflation. Once they have achieved that 2% average inflation rate over time, they know, not achieve it. Once they have successfully identified where that is, the inflation that they incorporate today could pull that timeline closer to us. There is no starting date. The starting date is today, right? That's why it's like so difficult for people to understand. They don't want to look at it like that. They want to look at it logically, which it's not logical, right? It's not. It is once you see it, like you kind of understand. Okay, now I get what they're trying to do. But from what we have learned in school and everything that we know about how to figure out what inflation is or average is or anything else, is not what the Federal Reserve is doing, right? And that's the hard part to try and wrap your head around, is that you kind of have to let go of what it is that you think you know about it, and then try to relearn it in a new fashion, right? And that's really what's happening here, right? So just think about it from today. If we were to look backwards from today and we went back in time to try and find when we have a 2% inflation, considering all the inflation that we have experienced today. It's not a starting date. It's a date that we achieve somewhere in time. If we experience more inflation today, that timeline moves closer to us. This is. I know it's difficult to understand. Yui, your video on the Fed's inflection point was awesome. Thank you. You described briefly in the video about the forces of deflation and how it was a problem. Could you further explain? The forces of deflation. Well, I think actually, if you go back and, well, maybe it's in here. Let me see if I have it. If we go back and you look at some of the things that Bernanke was talking about as far as the deflationary scenario that they were trying to avoid, it really comes down to growth, right? Let me see if it's in here. Hold on one second. Here's the capture. Huh. Yeah, I don't know. I thought I had it saved in here, but I guess I don't. But I guess, okay, so why would people want inflation as opposed to deflation? Like, now you really have to understand it from 2 points of view. Just like anybody else out there, there's some people who do quite well during a recession and other people do terrible, right? It's because of how you positioned yourself. So if you are like a saver, somebody who has like money put in towards like things that have interest return on it, that is, doing quite well as far as high interest rates go, all those things are a benefit to you. You're thinking, man, this is awesome. Why wouldn't I want this? Of course you want that, right? You want things to be cheaper and your savings to buy more stuff, and that just seems awesome, right? Like, who wouldn't want that? That's a great thing for the individual, right? But now on the opposite side of that thing, you also have an idea that you want this expansion to take place, right? You have this ever increasing amounts of population and people and, or I mean, I guess businesses, services that take place. You have this ever increasing expansion. Now, how do you facilitate the ability to have this ever increasing expansion of people and stuff and still be able to have the currency be flowing and worthy, right? This is a very difficult thing to do. Like, if you had it, okay, let's try and think about it. Let's think about it from the fixed currency kind of standpoint, right? If you have gold as a fixed currency within the economy, and you all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, you start to have this expansion with business, right? And people are start doing more business, they're starting to do more transactions, there's more stuff taking place, and people are expanding those businesses. Well, now there's more profit coming in. That profit begins to get hoarded, and now the gold is starting to remove the circulation of money from the average person out there. So now the economy is suffering with the lack of available currency because it's all being hoarded because it's gold, right? Now, this is kind of like simply explained, but now this hoarding of gold has created a situation in which that the economy slows down dramatically, and a redistribution of that gold has to go back out there to the economy. And this is the business cycle that takes place, right? So now, if you're going to have something, a system in which that you have an elastic money supply because they're going to remove or at least try to smooth out this business cycle. I'm not trying to say this is a good or bad thing either, right? I mean, to be honest with you, I'd much rather have the business cycle of things, because then really you rise and fall on your own merits and the best you can understand the economy. So therefore you can position yourself better. And if you're not understanding it, you're going to suffer the consequences from it. But I guess that happens no matter what. However, we don't have that type of operation. What we have is an elastic money supply in which during these business cycles, when things started to get extra hot, the elastic money supply, the Federal Reserve, the central banks would then add currency to the economy to then make it more functioning, like to continue the transactions, right? To smooth out operations, I guess, so to speak. So there wouldn't be a lack of currency due to the hoarding of gold that would typically happen when the economy would start heating up. So now, how do you keep this operation going, right? Because really, in the inception of, like, when they first created this idea, the elastic money supply could be kind of handled. It could be somewhat governed because you had gold as a fixed thing, right? Kind of giving it the stability of the rock, so to speak. Like, this is like it. This is our center. This is our anchor. But once that was removed, now you have this like elastic money supply that's just gone out of control. So it's in a much different position considering. Now, however, once they removed the gold from the system and that rock, so to speak, that stability was now gone, and now the elastic money supply really has a limitless amount of ability to it. How do you keep this thing going in a fashion that doesn't actually fall the other way? Because deflation is a serious problem when it comes to like trying to keep the economy going. Like, what do you do to try and get people to spend money, right? If you're in a deflationary scenario, people are hoarding money and they don't want to spend it. So hiring people, spending money on investing on new business, trying to do things that will keep the economy up and functioning ends up going the opposite direction as people are hoarding onto this money, thinking that even if I was to start a business today, the amount of money that I invest into the business would then be more, or have lost, what would it say? I would have had a better purchasing power starting the business later. Like, you postpone the starting of the business because starting it now would be more expensive than waiting because of the deflationary aspect of it. Does that kind of make sense? So now starting businesses slow down. Hiring people slows down. Keeping inventory slows down. All the stuff that typically happens in the economy that would be expanding during the inflationary scenarios is going the actually opposite way. However, the people who did happen to hoard the money or save the money or just be this natural savers to begin with, it's their day. Like, they do well in that, right? All of a sudden now they're picking up staying things that they have been postponing on purchasing for a much better price. So for a small group of people, it does quite well. But for another group of people who are looking for that expansion, looking to try and start businesses, looking to do, ever increasing amounts of transactions, their environment is depleting, where the saver, their environment is growing. Like, they get better opportunities from it. So again, it's depending on how you position yourself. I mean, a lot of people just immediately think, no, deflation's automatically a good thing. Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, it probably is for a lot of people who are not starting businesses, not looking to invest, not looking to do things like that. Like, they're just literally trying to hold on to their savings or make their savings and their money go a little bit further. Deflation sounds great to them because the items that they buy are then cheaper. However, a lot of times they don't realize that finding work to buy those items is also difficult. All right. 98 people watching. That is awesome. We got 63 likes right now. Great work, Simon. Thank you. Lots of five. Please see my earlier two comments on hydrogen fuel cell tech. Wonder if it might be a very positive wild card for the economy. You know, I don't know. Like, think about how impactful. Okay, like, it could be huge, right? It could be very impactful. Is it going to be as impactful as, say, what the internet has done to the economy or for the economy? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of things that could come to the economy that is not something that we are using today that can be an alternative to the energy sources that we are using. However, like, how big of a change is that really going to do? Is it going to completely shift the way that we are doing things? Is it going to make manufacturing come back to the United States in a meaningful way? I don't think so. Like, I mean, it might change the way that a lot of things are operated, as far as, like, the use of, like, fossil fuels as opposed to hydrogen cells or something like that. it could change the way that a lot of things are done, but I don't think it's going to change the grand scheme of things and the way that the new money is flowing into the system or how that new money is going to flow to the system. I mean, so yeah, I could bring all kinds of like, new types of, like say transportation or something like that. But, as far as like a meaningful change to the economy that can say, hey, this is going to be very impactful and nothing is ever the same again after that, I don't see that. Um, Good to catch you live. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for being here. I'm just kind of, like, I did a 2 hour live stream earlier today, and I'm probably going to do this one for another, I don't know, 20 minutes or so until Freddie gets out of the basketball practice. But I just wanted, like, I was just so, I'm just so amazed by like all the information. Like, if you read the documents that I leave down in the description and you read them for yourself and you internalize that information, it doesn't, it like all of a sudden, like, I don't seem that like, like it's not like I have like this profound information. It's just like, oh yeah, you just read these documents and you just talked about what you read. Ha ha, very, real informative you are. But that's literally it. I just did. I just read their documents and I'm like, hey man, this is what they said. And so, but I internalize that information and not dismiss it, right? Like a lot of people want to say, no, they failed. Like that was probably one of the biggest things that I heard coming at the midst, like at the height of the inflation, right? When it was running super rampant and everybody was like freaking out and they didn't know what the hell was going on and they thought the end of the world was ending. And they said that the Fed made a mistake. And I'm like, no, the Fed didn't. This is what the Fed was wanting. This is exactly the position in which that the Federal Reserve was looking for to save their monetary policy. And everybody says they made a mistake. They didn't. They totally succeeded. Like the actual opposite of a mistake, And because like 90% of the people believe that it was a mistake, it worked. That's what, and that's what's so crazy about the whole thing is that if people didn't realize, or if people actually believed that the Federal Reserve had done it, was like if they didn't believe that they had made a mistake, if they didn't have that belief, then I don't believe that the inflation scenario would have taken off to the point that they would have recovered their monetary policy from it. Like it was literally people feeling that they had failed that saved them. Just like, isn't that weird? Like you would think that the support and the belief of the people would be what saves them, but it wasn't. It was the actual feeling of failure coming from the mainstream media that gave them the belief that they were not going to succeed and that inflation was going to run persistent, that notion saved the Federal Reserve. Nuts, right? Absolutely nuts. Simon emailed you a video showing dollar demand outside of the US and how urban areas use local currencies less and less. Local currencies move to rural areas only. Yeah, and everything else is being used as the dollar, right? Because the dollar dominance is just so persistent. Like a lot of people don't want to believe it, but it is. Like the dollar is in high demand around the world, and people just don't want to believe that from everything that we have experienced over the last couple of years. And there was so much talk of cash is trash. And now once you have this belief that cash is trash, it's very difficult to reverse it to say, oh my gosh, it's not. I mean, it's in high demand. Like people around the world really do want the dollar, and they don't believe that the U.S. is well, they probably do believe that the U.S. is an evil empire or whatever, but it doesn't matter. They still want the dollar, right? And that's where I think a lot of people like just really misinterpret like what's happening within the economy. Because if you take on that belief that the dollar has completely failed and that it's on its way out and that there is no saving it and that you might as well get out of it as soon as you can and get into gold, if you have that belief, then what's going to end up happening is you're sitting waiting for the inevitable collapse, never once ever actually participating in the economy, right? You're sitting there going, no, I am participating. I'm waiting for you all to fail, right? And then it's going to fail. You just watch and see. And you wait and you wait and you wait and you wait and you sit on your silver and you wait and you wait and you wait. Because I know this is what I've done for 15 years. And then I realized it was just like, you know what? I'm tired of waiting. I want to make some money, right? Or at least I want to have my money grow. And next thing I know, I got cryptocurrencies and stocks, and I still got the silver, right? But I'm actually participating in this economy because I know that the inevitable collapse is not necessarily an inevitable timeline. So what are you going to sit around and wait 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What if it doesn't happen in your lifetime? What happens in your kids or their kids? Right? So at some point you have to say, okay, I'm going to think about the Federal Reserve's monetary policy in a way that they're thinking about it so that then I can adjust my beliefs and my understandings to what it is that they are doing so that I can then be in the best position to conduct myself. Because if I believe that they failed, then I cannot conduct myself in a way that says, okay, I can be making appropriate decisions with stocks and all this other stuff because they failed. No, you would be in worry. You would be like, okay, they failed. I need to be in gold. I need to be in bullets. I need to be in food. I need to be in security. And I need to be in something that doesn't have any faith in them whatsoever. Right? That's cool. I have that position too. That gives me the reason that I don't have to give them faith. I can just look at what their words are and then say, okay, I'm going to best appropriately position myself on account of what it is that I feel that they are going to be doing with their monetary policy. And if they fail at it, I got my silver position. Right? But I don't think that they're failing at it. Everybody else thinks they failed at it, right? I think that they succeeded, and I'm one of just a handful of people who do, and it's based off of what it is that they needed, considering their statements from 2019, where they were literally shaking in their boots trying to figure out where they were going to get inflation from, because their monetary policy had failed. It had reached the lower bound of zero, meaning they couldn't drop their interest rates any further. Think about it. Just go back and look at the Fed funds rate. Prior to the pandemic, it was already falling. And if they cannot drop it around 5%, they are going to have a very difficult time trying to stimulate the economy. And they were at 2.5% when they started to lower them. There was no room. Literally, once they started lowering them from 2.5%, you could have written them off right then, saying that's it, monetary policy done. Like they can't if it's not at 5% when they go to start lowering it, that form of stimulus is done. It's not going to work. Period. They are going to have to use something else in order to stimulate the economy, and they knew it was going to come from a fiscal stimulus response. Now, in 2019, how they could possibly know that it was going to be the pandemic that did it, it's beyond me. Right? I mean, I don't want to call them out as knowing ahead of time that they had some sort of plan for this pandemic, but if they didn't have the pandemic kick in when it did, they were done. They were out of monetary policy. We would have had a financial crisis, and they would have had to have some sort of reasonings for going into all that stimulus that would basically save all the corporations and keep people from losing all their jobs and everything. But because of the pandemic, that gave them all the excuses that they need and all the reasons that they had to do all the stimulus packages and saving the economy the way it did. I mean, it was so crystal clear obvious to me when it was taking place. And that way, and that's when I was like, that's when I started like realizing how much propaganda actually flies through the mainstream media, right? It was because of what was taking place in lumber and how like all this BS that was being stated about it. I'm like, are these people delusional? Or they like literally sound like they are making things up? Like they were in the back rooms going, "What do you know about lumber? I don't know. What do you know about lumber? Nothing. I don't know. Make something up. What is that the truth? Nobody cares. And that's literally what I was hearing off of the mainstream media. Is like these people are stupid. Like I have never said, like I don't mean to say that to call people that because I don't like that, because I was always called that when I was growing up, but that was stupid. It was stupid talk coming out of these mainstream media people because they had no clue of what it was that they were saying, but they were just putting out this gobbledygook and believing that it was true. And I'm sitting over there going, man, I will never trust you guys again. It's like the Republican Party blackballing Ron Paul. You lost it. You lost it. I've lost it for you. I won't believe you anymore, you know? So I pick out the little bits I do out of the mainstream media, but even now it's very difficult to do that and have any kind of faith in what it is that you're, reading. Oops. So, anyways, I could not understand how the stock market just kept going up. I just saw a chart that showed the amount of borrowed money in the stock market. Explained everything. Bank crisis equals stock crash too. Yeah, and I can believe it. And that's okay. How many people we got here? Cool, 102. I want to thank everybody who has joined the channel, the membership of the Uneducated Economist. It's growing so fast. We're over 400 members to the channel now. I think it's like 405 members to the channel. It's growing like just much quicker than I even had dreamed that it would. these live streams that we do are just absolutely incredible. They are so informative. They are boring as hell, guys. I don't want to like try to like, convince you of something that they're not. They are very boring. They are like talking monetary policy. They are very like, I don't even know how to describe it, as far as like it's like watching paint dry or something like that, right? However, understanding some of the things that are coming from the Federal Reserve when you read these speeches really gives you a much better insight into what is happening within the economy. You're able to call out things a lot clearer than these people who are like pretending like they understand what the Federal Reserve is doing. Like I've just pretty much lost faith with all economists out there, and I'm almost willing to go like toe to toe and debate monetary policy strategies with just about anybody out there. I mean, including the Federal Reserve itself, because I think I know it just about as good as they do. At least what it is that they have. I mean, I may not know like some of the little nuances of all this little stuff inside of here, but I mean, I think I got the overall gist of this pretty damn well. Now, their most recent speech coming from who is this? Let me look this up here. Coming from Michael S. Barr, who is a voting member of the FOMC. This speech was given just, I think, today. Um, yeah, February 14th. It was given just today. This is the intersection of monetary policy, market functioning, and liquidity risk management. Now, again, the FOMC, this is the Federal Open Market Committee. These are the voting members of monetary policy. Anytime you have ever heard an economist say that we need to fire Jerome Powell because he doesn't know what he is doing, you need to fire that dude. That economist right there who has blamed Jerome Powell, or any administration that blames Jerome Powell or says that they want to replace him because he's doing a terrible job, those people should be fired because they have no idea how monetary policy works. By removing Jerome Powell, you will do nothing to change anything about monetary policy. What you have to do is you have to look at the 12 voting members of monetary policy, the FOMC, and their 5 alternates, right? But the 12 voting members are the ones who are really conducting monetary policy, and the things that they say is what's important, not what Jerome Powell is saying individually. He is just a single person who votes for monetary policy or on monetary policy, along with the other 12 people or 11 other people. So he is just a spokesperson. He speaks for the FOMC. There is nothing that would ever possibly change if you were to fire him or get rid of him or even replace him with somebody else. All you would hear is somebody else's voice saying the exact same thing. Okay. So, in this speech that was just given, this is what he had to say. The FOMC reiterated May 2022 that its plans to operate monetary policy with an ample reserve regime over time. As many market commentators have pointed out, it may be difficult to determine what level of reserves is consistent with ample. The market dynamics from September of 2019 illustrates this. When repo rates spiked and these pressures spilled over into the federal funds market, the Fed had to rapidly ramp up operations to add reserves to the banking system. This episode was a leading factor to the establishment of the standing repo facility, which, along with the discount window, will help dampen pressure that could emerge in short-term money markets. So now, this is a very interesting statement. Now, most people would read that and say, like, what up, bro? Like, no big deal, right? To me, this was a very profound statement. Okay. And the reason is because of the way that it was stated about that repo facility. Right. These leading factors that led up to the standing repo facility. Like all of a sudden something happened within the economy. They were like, oh crap. We need to boom, here, we need the standing facility to deal with this new issue that has now come to the economy. Right? Okay. Isn't that the way it sounded? Let me read it again. All right. As many market commentators have pointed out, it may be difficult to determine what level of reserves is consistent with ample. The market dynamics from September of 2019 illustrates this. when repo rates spiked and these pressures spilled over into the Fed funds market. The Fed had to rapidly ramp up operations to add reserves to the banking system. This is what, and then this episode was a factor leading to the establishment of the standing repo facility. So basically, what they are saying is that this particular event created was a factor, right, that led into the standing repo facility. Now they knew this was coming because months earlier I had done a video that was called "Things Are Changing," talking about the Federal Reserve wanting a standing repo facility. Now, I didn't know it at the time when I was making that video that that's what they were really wanting, but when I go back and I look at that video, thinking about the information that was at least in that I was trying to decipher, that's ultimately what they were trying to say. Now, I didn't understand that at the time, right? I mean, because now things, hindsight's always 2020, but they were giving the information at the time. At the time that I was reading it, I was trying to like interpret it from what I was seeing at the moment. It turns out later on, months later, here we had this huge corporate debt tax payment that took a whole bunch of cash away from the banks and sent it over to the Treasury General account that left the banks sitting in a position in which that they did not have enough funding to operate the next day. Overnight lending shot up to like 10%, and the banks were going to have a hell of a time doing their financing the next day when all of a sudden they had no funding and interest rates were going to be like through the roof. That's when they stepped in with this repo facility. Now, looking back, it's like, oh, it makes so much more sense now why it is that they were talking about that standing repo facility months and months and months ahead of time before this particular event that they're talking about that happened to be a factor. Like, oh, there it is. You need a standing repo facility. No, they knew it. They knew it was coming, right? And that's how, like, by reading their documents, you can understand this stuff a lot clearer. Like people are taken by surprise by a lot of stuff, but if you go back and you just look and they don't bring it up, then like, oh, hey, by the way, hey guys, we were talking about this a couple of months ago. We covered it, but nobody else did, right? But we told you guys, but they don't say it like that, right? There was just like, oh, this factor popped up and we needed the standing repo facility. Weird, huh? Huh. Right? So this is the way we learn it. So if you want to learn more like this, if you want to understand the economy in this kind of fashion, then what you have to do is you have to join the channel and be part of the live streams that we do where we go through these speeches. We literally break them down word for word so that we totally internalize everything that they are saying so we are not taken by surprise when those events happen to start taking place. Anyway, I'm going to leave a link in the description after this video is uploaded to that live stream. Again, you're going to have to join the channel. It's $1 a month. It's $1 to you, but it's everything to me. I put a lot of work into trying to bring you the most current information, breaking down this stuff so that you can internalize it and understand it for yourselves. What else can I say? All right, uneducated economist, you guys let me know. And thank you everybody for being here. We had 107 people watching this live stream right now with 88 likes. And I'm sorry I didn't get through all these wonderful comments that I'm sure are in there. What's the last one? All-nighter. I am almost ready to go. Thanks for the ear candy. Yeah, you bet, man. I am looking forward. We're headed to Vegas here in a couple of days. I'm looking forward to hanging out with All-Nighter and Mike Zuber and Lumberjack and all the rest of the guys who are going to be down there. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be a very quick trip for me. It's only like literally, I think I'm going to be gone for like 48 hours or something like that. But still, it ought to be a really fun 48 hours, and I'm looking forward to it. So, yeah, uneducated economist, you guys let me know.